Global Partners for Development proudly presents What Do You Understand? A deep dive into the many facets of philanthropy and development. We will have conversations about what really works and what really doesn't. Do we know yet how to solve poverty? Are big ideas the answer, or do we need to look for small, grassroots solutions? Experts in their field will discuss an aspect of their work that they understand particularly well. We will delve into how their work addresses global inequity with an honest conversation about impact. Let's talk about big bets, innovation, social enterprises, large-scale humanitarian aid, and the fixation on ending things, or solving humanity's greatest problems, and the issues that arise while tackling it all. I am your host, Ria Pullin, and my co-host is the Executive Director of Global Partners for Development, Daniel Casanova. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Hey, Ria.
This is it.
We're
Pilot.
doing it.
We're doing it.
We're doing
This
the
is
pilot.
it.
I think the other key to this is, what was it? It's Ria learns development.
Yeah, Ria learns philanthropy because I'm coming in with more of like a hosting background, but this is my first foray into the nonprofit world, into philanthropy, and I am learning by jumping in.
Yeah.
So you know pretty much, like, through all your experiences, have learned about philanthropy and development. Can you kind of explain to me how you get started in this? Is this something you wanted to do as a kid?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an adventurer. Like, I was thinking about us doing this. I was like, there's all those sound bites you have in life of like, this is what I say about myself. So I was going to try to not do that, but I will start by doing that. I always say that people ask me, like, I wanted to be like Sir Richard Burton or Lawrence of Arabia. I was like gonna be an adventurer. My grandfather was like overly fixated on those like British explorers, and I was I grew up around ethnographic and tribal art, and I thought like, oh, I want to go to those places. So as a younger person, I would have been like, no, I was going to be like Indiana Jones and travel around the world, and it was really aimless and privileged, and there wasn't a lot of focus to it. So when I graduated high school, that's what I did. I went and traveled around the world and tried to do it in really obscure ways. Like I tried to travel as much by like foot or land or sea. And, but I think that the short versions, that as I did those things, I always came in contact with some form of development or philanthropy or NGOs working in the world. And it was always like, it's hard to go travel in the world and not see disparity and poverty and be moved to do something about it. So the universe had a plan. Like I initially I'd be like, maybe I'm going to be like a filmmaker. And I was like a megalomaniac young guy. So I was like, oh, I'm going to do these amazing things. And it was really ego driven. But the other side of my life is that my parents, I think, are philanthropists, and through and through. And growing up, my dad was an executive director for a large nonprofit based in Los Angeles that worked with homeless people. And so I grew up around that.
You're just following in his footsteps?
I'm just there's nepotism there. I mean, you do what you learn. I mean, or I could have been a book dealer or something like that. But when I was in high school, I used to volunteer at needle exchange programs in Los Angeles. And this was in the early days of like the harm reduction movement and those things. And it was because my dad was involved in it. So, but it was cool. It was like all these young punk rock people, and it felt radical, and it was that kind of thing. So I got involved in doing that. And then similarly, when I traveled internationally, I started gathering all these other types of philanthropic groups to do work with. I worked with a floating hospital in Bangladesh, Friendship Floating Hospital, and met people in West Africa that were doing things, and started developing that network. And then, you have to work. So you weren't
making money doing this?
No, it wasn't. Well, I mean, no one was paying me to be an adventurer. So, yeah, exactly. So, after I traveled a long time, I was offered an opportunity to run a needle exchange program in LA. And so I did that. And, that led to lots of other types of consulting work with nonprofits. And I always tell people I'm an expert at hanging out with old white men. So that, I mean, there's what's interesting about nonprofit work is like, there's a lot of what's going on in the backdrop is just around fundraising and marketing and doing those things and relationship building. And I joke a lot. People talk about like, how do you get grants from major foundations or how do you get funding? And I'm like, I think of it, it's like it's fit into the niche of the capitalist system. There's like this inner circle of people that are already that are getting funded by this small amount of funders, you know, 'cause it's not a large network. And then there are this like middle circle of people that are like hovering. And then there's everyone else that's like in this outer ring. And so like the people that are in the outer ring are never going to make it into that inner ring. And like the only way to get into that inner ring is to be in that middle ring, and someone in that inner ring has to die.
Oh, it's a little morbid.
Yeah, right. And so then when they die, someone like steps in. But anyway, so
are you talking about the inner ring of givers or the inner ring of nonprofits that want the money?
Inner ring of nonprofits that want the money. There's like the people that are making the grant makers and funders in the small inner ring. You have to be in with them. It's like networks of things. And I think it's like anything, right? There's the people that are in the zeitgeist, right? That are like the hot thing for whatever reason, or the hot person in philanthropy, right? They're the philanthropic superstars and people running programs. So
what's an example of something that's in the middle ring? Is that like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation?
Well, I mean, Bill and Melinda Gates would be the people who are funders in that, and then there's the people that want to be there. So there's the people that get all the awards. There's the people that get awards from like the Skull Foundation or the awardees of the Bill and Melinda Gates stuff. And I think that it's nepotistic and it's small and
it's based on your network, maybe?
I think it is based on. I think the people that are those funders would want to say that it's based on really good science, and that and it's true. It's not that those organizations aren't good, right? It's whatever. I think similar to anything, there's a lot of other organizations and unknown things that are not getting in because they don't have the network or the connection or aren't doing it.
So from the Needle Exchange Program to Global Partners, where was this arc that brought you to Global Partners from the Needle Exchange Program, kind of as your first foray into leading like a nonprofit cause?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd been doing a lot of domestic work at the time before I came to Global Partners. I was working at a homeless youth shelter in Berkeley, and I wanted to work. I mean, the honest truth is my wife was like, you need to get a straight job and not be working for so many people. And then she also was like, maybe we should go live abroad somewhere. You should start looking at international jobs, because I had that background in doing that. So Global Partners happened. I mean, it was just like one of those random things. And I think culturally, I grew up going to these like hippy dippy private schools and talking about my feelings. And the Global Partners is this very unusual organization in that I think the board of directors are people that communicate really well and can talk about things in a really grown-up way and build consensus, and that is like part of the culture of the organization. And then they also were really cool because they were, it's really, I think it's hard to find work from the worker bee, right? Like being the person in the organization. It's hard to find organizations where you're not plugged into a really giant system.
Okay.
It's already got something amazing going that you're just like a cog in the wheel doing. Whereas Global Partners had this really interesting ethos that I believed in my other grassroots work, which was like true grassroots work that was funding projects that were community led by the recipients of the, pieces. So Needle Exchange is like that. Needle Exchange came out of this movement of drug addicts and users creating programs for themselves. And so Global Partners had a similar type of philosophy, right? They are funding projects that are led by local people on the ground.
So that's what grassroots is. And what is the opposite of grassroots, I guess?
Well, there's top-down development. I mean,
does that mean just throwing lots of money at a problem? What is the
it looks
opposite
like a lot
of grassroots?
of things. I mean, I think, what's interesting is I think it's not organized. I mean, the opposite of grassroots, I think, would be top-down
Okay.
funding. And so on the large scale, it's government programs, right? And now I think government programs want to be more grassroots and funding.
Okay.
It's just really hard. We're talking about having to move lots of money. I mean, this is an issue both from a government perspective or from philanthropy. It's super hard to move lots of money. Like, you can't giving away money is not easy, or doing it ethically or responsibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like making sure the recipients are going to use that money for what they say they're going to use it for, or.
Yeah, I mean, knowing what happens to the money, knowing, how good of an intervention it is. Does it have, what kind of impact does it have? And it's really expensive to evaluate programs. So
I see.
Yeah, so it's like, how do you do that? So on the ones that, if there's grassroots on one end, the other end is this large scale projects that are really more like, the criticism right now would be is like, it's, developed nations, it's the US and Europe telling the global South what they need to fund and how they need to fund it. I think we're well beyond that. I mean, while there are people, maybe they're still living in that world, because you have to, like, in terms of like large scale humanitarian crisis, like that has to be done by governments or by large entities that can move huge amounts of resources around the world. But on another scale, a lot of projects used to look that way, right? Lots of development in the world used to be like, oh, you need electricity, you need water, you need health resources. And so somebody in Europe or the US would make a decision and an entity and figure out how to do that and go on the ground and implement it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to Global Partners, but I heard there's a story about building a boat that we need to discuss. Did you build a boat? How? How do you even learn how to build a boat?
Yeah, I know. This is one of those young man things.
So you wanted to be Indiana Jones. Like that's what you wanted to be.
Yeah. Or like Thor Heyerdahl or something like that. I mean, so Bangladesh at the time. So this was in 2002. Yeah. I had traveled to Bangladesh before in 1999, and it's a really amazing space. But one of the things that's really particularly unique about it is there's this rich tradition of wooden boat builders and all sorts of different types of wooden boats. And it's a riverine country, so they need boats to move things. And I had the idea like, oh, we're going to build a boat in Bangladesh and we're going to sail it to Australia. So I got 3 friends to go with me and do it, and we were going to make a documentary film about it. I mean, I think, to be honest, I was more motivated by, and this is with a lot of the things I did, is like being able to say I did something, or like there was,
is it like bucket list items maybe?
Yeah, or like the glory of be like, oh, I'm gonna bicycle across the north of Africa and then down the west coast, and I did that, but it was really terrible, and I don't know.
Did you make it to Australia?
Well, on no, we didn't. We sunk it. We hit a storm, and it broke the rudder of the boat, and we were rescued in the Indian Ocean by a Ukrainian tanker.
Are you serious?
Yeah, called the Mona Lisa, that was transporting palm oil from Bangladesh to Indonesia.
Did they speak English on the Ukrainian ship?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, what was interesting about this, one of the members on our boat was this Norwegian who was in the Coast Guard, and I remember as we were getting like radioing for rescue, we only had a VHF radio, so we can only like radio line of sight to someone.
Oh no!
But he was like, "Oh man, it cost those tankers like hundreds of thousands of dollars to like change direction or rescue us. Like they're going to be so angry when they pick us up, or they're not going to pick us up." But we got picked up. And it was dramatic because it's like, you have to imagine our boat was 12.5 meters, this small wooden Bangladeshi sampan. And there was this, football sized tanker that pulled up next to the boat. So it, they have these we thought that they would send a little rescue boat to come get us, but they pulled the tanker right up next to our boat. So it displaces a lot of water. So like we like came crashing in the side of their boat, and then and then they had like all their water cannons going because they're like worried about pirates and stuff like that.
Did you have to like declare who you were before you got on?
Well, they're like, one person can come up without anything, they're like, and then they're like, oh, look at who are these white kids in the Indian Ocean on, but so we got rescued, and we were really nervous, and we get brought to the captain's quarters, and he's drinking. He's like, yeah, and I feel bad saying it because I guess tanker captains probably shouldn't be drunk like that. I'm not. But it was his last voyage.
Okay.
And he was like,
going out with a bang.
Well, yeah, he's like the company told me that I couldn't rescue you, but I had rescued one other sailor in my life, this Italian sailor in the Mediterranean. And he's like, I wanted to, seamen have to help each other. So it's my last trip with them. So fuck them. I'm going to rescue you guys. So
did you keep in touch with this captain?
We have, yeah. But, so we spent the rest of the night just drinking. And it was weird. And then the next morning happened really quickly because it was like the middle of the night while we rescued. And in the morning we watched our boat sink. And it was I'd been really fixated and focused on doing this trip. And I think I was like a jerk to my friend. I know I was. I don't think I was like a jerk.
You were.
Yeah, I was a jerk. But the experience was really elating because it was like ecstatic to watch the boat sink, because here's this thing where I had spent, the last year working. It was really hard living in Bangladesh. Like, one of the Norwegians that was with us had arsenic poisoning and was hospitalized in Norway for part of the trip, and we had to deal with the government, and it was, it's hard. It was hard.
I know the
and we're little
your
boys.
Next movie.
Oh yeah,
I know
it. Yeah, right. I'm gonna go to Africa, to East Africa, and build a boat.
No, that's a bad idea.
With Global Partners.
Bad idea. So from that experience, what did you pull from that to kind of help you along the rest of your career as far as development, seeing how it was living in Bangladesh, trying to build a boat and have this end goal? What did you kind of learn from that?
I mean, so one was I developed relationships with people at the UNHCR, because where we lived in Bangladesh was near where all the Rakhine refugees from Myanmar were living. So I built those connections, and like I said, there was that theme there. Mm-hmm. But the bigger one was that it definitely killed for me that part of me that wanted to do these ego-driven things, and so I was like, I don't need to adventure anymore. Like,
you did it.
I did it. I was like, it was really traumatic. It was actually, it was really sailing in a wooden boat and a big storm was really, really super stressful. So I can
imagine.
Yeah.
And then
but it led me to want to, I think. I came back, and that was when I worked for the Needle Exchange.
Oh, it was after.
It was after that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, I think still at that time, to be honest, it was really accidental. It was more like, okay, this is the work that I know how, I know how to work with boards of directors and fundraise, and it just made sense. And that just snowballed into continuing to work with different nonprofits. But what was good is that I had all of this international experience, being on the ground in places and implementing projects. So that turned into lots of work, being able to go to a remote space somewhere and help to build something,
Maybe that boat experience, did it maybe change things from being about you and more being about others and helping others? Because it sounds
not in a cliche way or anything like that.
You're not trying to save, your movie that you're making. You're gonna go help people on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, as I got older, definitely. I mean, having kids does that. I mean, I actually feel, to be honest, it feels more synchronistic or less planned. Just in I feel fortunate that that's the work that I've been able to do. I mean, I'm it's hard for me to think about being motivated to make money. Which isn't good. I mean, for an individual, right? But it's it's really, I feel fortunate. I can do the work that Global Partners does because it's so intimate and because I think it has this really great ethos. It feels good to do those projects and meet those partners on the ground and do that kind of work. So I feel lucky. And I think it's part of this lineage, I could say that it's intentional. I did this altruistic thing. I used to be this terrible person, and then now I saw poverty, I'm going to do this. I was like, no, I grew up in LA. My dad worked in Skid Row. I knew about poverty. I mean, it was more accidental. Oh, there's this universe has a plan for me to hang out with old white men.
To help people all over the world.
Right? The world, yeah.
That's right. So I have no segue, but I am supposed to ask you about a cheeseburger gun, and there's no way to segue into asking you about a cheeseburger gun. So there it is.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. When I interviewed for Global Partners, they were asking like, what would you want to do? Like, what would you do with the organization? Or like, tell us about ideas you might have, like how to like represent our work. And I've always been people. I don't know, a lot of people don't know about this, but some people do. Is like, Jonathan Swift wrote an essay called A Modest Proposal, and it was during the Irish potato famine.
Okay.
And so it was put in the major newspapers at the time in the UK, but it had recipes for. It opens with an essay talking about like how terrible poverty is in Ireland and like how horrible it is to have all these babies, and it's really critical. And then it ends with the modest proposals, like it's recipes for how to cook Irish babies.
Stop.
Yeah.
It was actually published?
Oh yeah, it's
was
great.
it
It's
as
called
a joke?
No, it's well, it was a joke.
It's a joke.
Satirical. He, yeah. So yeah, he's who wrote Gulliver's Travels.
Oh, okay.
Which is also satirical.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, but so I feel like the world needs a new modest proposal. So like one of there are all of these issues with development, but I think that because Global Partners had this history from being world runners, which was their mission was to end world hunger.
Okay.
So I thought, the world needs a modern day like modest proposal like that, and so mine was like, well, we should invent the cheeseburger gun, like, so, and like because it's easy, right? You can mount it onto helicopters or onto tanks, and you could just like
you're just gonna drop cheeseburgers.
And cheeseburgers have lots of protein, and just shoot them at poor people, right? So
Daniel, the images. They'll be like, geez, it's like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs almost.
Yeah, but it's like feed the world, right? So it's like I think like the world needs them. But I mean, obviously it's satirical because it's like this is the problem with top-down aid.
Okay.
Or even with other systems, it's just like people get like the idea of trying to end things is strange, right? Like the idea that like, oh, we could make this system like, yeah, you could feed people by shooting cheeseburger, like, but it doesn't solve their problems and there.
So what are the because we talked about solving the big problems and ending things. What are these things that people have claimed to end? Like I guess what you said with World Runners, they were trying to end world hunger.
Yeah.
Is it just not realistic, or the way they're going about it is not realistic? We shouldn't think about ending world hunger or bringing peace to the entire world. Is that just some fantasy, or how do you think?
I mean, so I'm really optimistic. I think we live in a world where things keep getting better. I think that the problem becomes if the focus is too much on those things. So like people like have these ideals. We want to live in a peaceful world.
A utopia.
A world without you, like all these things. But it's really nebulous, and it's really hard to know what that looks like or means. We live in a world where there's great disparity, right? There are people that have so much, and there's people that have so little. And so I think we need to figure out how to address that. So, and those things aren't about ending these isms, like ending. It's like they're more grounded in real things. Like people need. It's not complicated. It's not rock science. Like people need healthcare. People need roads. People need functioning governments. Like we kind of know what works, but what happens, I think, is, and this is definitely like a product of the world we live in, where like this idea like business is going to save the world. I think like innovation is great. And those things are going to continue to improve our lives. But if we still have to solve these other problems, like, like we're not going to, we just see it a lot in our work. There's not going to be this device that just like you push a button that's going to feed people or end poverty. They have to have these functioning systems like that they fit into. And those things aren't that complicated. So I think we see, it's like people are really seduced by those innovative ideas because they sound amazing. Like, so ones I hear about right now are like these like solar companies around the world, or like in West Africa, where they're like, oh, they're ending energy poverty.
Oh, okay.
Which is fine. Like, obviously, like, and then they'll have these narratives about like, oh, well, there's all these people that don't have energy, and imagine like having surgery under candlelight, or like these things. But it's like, yeah, hospitals need electricity, right? Like But this idea that there's energy poverty and solving it's going to be this thing is more like, no, there's a lot of problems that need to get solved for those people. There needs to be development. And I think that the fixation on these innovative ideas takes away from more practical ideas that are locally led and simple, that just need to happen for people to thrive, right?
Okay. And so is that how Global Partners works, as far as they're not trying to end or fix, they're more talking to local communities about what they need in that immediate moment?
I think I think that Global Partners fell into this niche of grassroots work. So when they were world runners, they were on this movement of ending hunger in the world, and they were doing it by running marathons and raising money. But then they were just ultimately giving money to large entities, international entities that were doing that type of poverty work. And I think they realized, they're like, well, we actually want to be able to give money directly on the ground to schools and women's groups and people that are living in that poverty and doing it. And so that's how Global Partners came to be. And so so I think that for those founders that were doing that, I think that they were still trying to move the needle of like infant child mortality and hunger and like, but their idea was the way to do that isn't by funding these top-down things. The way to do that is to go down and ask people what they need, and to be able to. And it's not even just asking. I think it's more. It just has to be steered by local people. Local people have to invest in their own projects, and and ultimately, like, it is about capital. They need capital to be able to do. They could have all the hopes and dreams and organize or be given all of the amazing aid or innovation or mosquito nets or whatever, but ultimately at the end of the day, is like they need to have their own civic engagement and organization. I think that was what was going on with Global Partners.
And so who's actually doing the work and making the projects move along? Is it Western countries coming in and doing it, or is it the local people doing it? How does Global Partners work as far as getting the projects done?
Yeah, so we have East African staff on the ground that implement that, but mostly the way that happens, and historically that happened through partnerships with other local entities, like really small CBOs, community-based organizations, and also just local leaders in the communities where we had been working for many, many years. So.
And how do you find these leaders? Do they find you, or do you approach them?
I mean, at this point now, it's through a network of people that we've developed relationships with. I think, initially when we went to East Africa, we went to Nairobi, and we worked in the slums in Nairobi, and that was like how we got engaged there. But from there, the network just expanded. So I think I would say, like, there's a network throughout East Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Burundi, of elders and organizations that we've worked with. And so some of those were like Maasai women's groups that had 20 members when we met them, and now they're organizations that are larger than us. And I think that's the kind of work that I'm passionate about. It's like finding so it's similar, like startups, right? Like high risk, high reward. Yeah. So when I see a lot of grassroots funds or people that are saying that they fund grassroots work, the barrier to receive that funding is so high that even global partners would barely qualify, right? But they're saying they want to be doing that work with local people. So in our work that I'm really passionate about is like we can identify local people that don't have an entity form, that maybe don't even have a CBO, but are already doing work in their communities, and help them to build an organization and scale that and fund projects with them, and then build a partnership so that they can become that organization that maybe then can tap into those other types of grassroots funding.
Oh, that's great. So you kind of set up a system where then they can help themselves after that.
Yeah. A lot, I mean, and then practically a lot of our work on the ground right now is, and what our team in Kenya does is, we identify low-performing schools in a particular region, and we do infrastructure projects with them. But from that, that's also a way that we identify new partners to then do work with.
Okay, that's interesting. And so in your time with Global Partners, from the first time you went to East Africa to how long have you been with Global Partners now?
9.5 years.
Wow. How many trips to East Africa would you say you've done in 9.5 years?
20-something.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Have you seen kind of an evolution, or have you seen just from like projects you saw when you first started to now, do you see an impact?
I mean, I think our work is great. I mean, I see an impact. It's also, I think that the world is developing. So, or I see organizations take credit for things that they do, right? Because it's like anything. Like you can go in and influence something and then be like, look, we built this, and then that led to all of these other amazing things in this community. We gave this community some cows, and now they've built rocket ships, right?
Where's that correlation?
Yeah, I know, and like we're going to take credit for those rocket ships. I think in our work that, what's interesting about traveling with some of the founders is, we funded projects with women groups in parts of Uganda where now they're these really massive organizations. What's really interesting about it is the work that they're doing civically and politically and how that's growing and what that's changing in their environment. And we have, historical scholarship recipients that, have done amazing things. I mean, so I think it's really weird to take credit for those things because I think that even without Global Partners or any organization, like progress is happening.
Yeah. So what's our plan here with this podcast? Like, we're going to talk to these people, these experts, about what they know well, and is it going to relate to development, to philanthropy? What do we want to get from these experts on a whole? Just a conversation? What is our end goal of trying to figure out how the great minds think about philanthropy and development?
Well, I mean, I want to do to them what you didn't do to me, which is make me have to be certain about something. So, I like the idea people have to do this, right? Like these experts in their field have to have, they're where they are for a reason and they know about something. So I'm curious to see what people can talk about that they a subject they understand really particularly well and can speak to and say, I know this thing and this is what I believe or know and this is why. And at the base, that's just initially what I want to be able to get from them.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, I think it's then having a dialogue about their field and being like, what are the problems in your field? What are the things people are saying that you don't agree with? Those kinds of things. And, politically, I think people have to speak with their hands tied a lot because there's the things you're supposed to say and there's just the way things are. And it's interesting to hear people when you can get them to be like, well, this isn't working. And this is why I think, but this is why it's not happening or why it's not changing. So, I think there's a lot. I think we actually are in a moment where the intentions are there for people and we have a lot of really great academics and knowledge about how to solve poverty or how to make the world better, but we can't agree about them.
Okay.
And then also we don't know how to implement some of those things and they're not getting implemented. And there's lots of excuses for why. And so I think while we live in an era where we have a lot of the answers, I think we also right now have a lot of people that are working on bad projects in so many fields. But that's just my thing. I mean,
Yeah. And what I kind of love, just to bring back up the cheeseburger gun, is I think when experts talk to each other, breaking pens. Yeah. He's Hulk now. What I loved about the cheeseburger gun is I think when tech experts speak to each other, they have this high level of speak that they understand each other, whereas I'm not from this world. Yeah. So your cheeseburger gun thing, that makes sense to me. I need to be able to understand it just like any layperson could understand it. Yeah. So that's really helpful. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. You gonna work on that?
Yeah, I gotta work on Yeah.
Your cheeseburger. Yeah. Is it In-N-Out? Is it McDonald's? Is it BK Broiler?
Oh yeah, I was thinking this Fat Burger.
Oh. Yeah. Oh. Not White Castle.
Not White Castle. I love White Castle burgers. Yeah, man. Those are easy. Yeah.
Oh, don't get us started on food. Oh no, it's gonna end forever.
Thank you, Ria.
All right, thank you, Daniel, and I can't wait to talk to all the experts in their field and figure out how we're gonna not end world hunger and not bring world peace, but do it in ways that are manageable and actually scalable. Okay. Thanks, Daniel.
At Global Partners for Development, our mission is to advance community-led initiatives that improve education and public health in East Africa. We envision a world in which every East African community has the capacity to implement dynamic, sustainable solutions to the challenges they face. To learn more, visit gpfd.org.